Hey, friend, welcome to She Said podcast. I'm your host, Laura Cox Kaplan. Last week on this podcast, my dear friend Sheryl Sandberg joined me for episode 360, and we had a really fabulous, wide-ranging conversation, and we covered so many topics, from the legacy of Lean In some 13 years later to AI and its impact, especially on women in the workforce, to resilience and post-traumatic growth, something that Sheryl knows all too well from her firsthand experience, to her inspiring work fighting child marriage all around the world. If you missed our conversation, I hope you'll go back and check it out because there are so many topics that I think will resonate with you. But as I reflected on our conversation, there was one topic in particular that came up that I want to dig into a bit more deeply this week, because I think it's going to resonate with so many people who are facing a potential career pivot or who, like me, at a particular moment in my own life, had outgrown the role that I was in, but I wasn't quite sure how to navigate that evolution. This, by the way, is one of the topics that I'm tackling in an upcoming book that I'm working on. I'm going to talk more about that a bit later because today I want to start with this topic that came up in my conversation with Sheryl. At one point in our conversation last week, I asked Sheryl something that I'm not sure anyone has asked her in a long time. I asked her, as you think about ambition for Sheryl Sandberg today in 2026, is it still ambition or is it a different word? Now, keep in mind, when she wrote Lean In, she was at the top of her corporate career. She was COO of then Facebook, which is now Meta. So the question of how she thinks about ambition now, more than a decade later, and in a very different chapter of her life, felt like one that was really worth exploring. And without missing a beat, she said, it's ambition. I'm ambitious. But then she did something really interesting. She didn't talk about a title or a role or the next chapter in a conventional sense. She talked about being ambitious for her foundation and the issues that her foundation is working on. She said she was ambitious for the next generation of women, for showing up as a great board member at an AI company that she's just joined, for being ambitious for wanting her own daughters, and frankly mine, to be able to choose what they want to do with their lives. That answer, what she said related to this topic of ambition, made me pause. Because what Sheryl was describing wasn't ambition in the way that we typically think about it, as maybe a ladder that you climb or a room that you're trying to get into, or maybe a title that you're driving toward. It was something bigger than that and more expansive and frankly more personal, and it made me think about my own story. A number of years ago, Sheryl asked me to write my Lean In story as part of the launch of her book, Lean In. Now, if you heard our conversation last week, you know that I already mentioned that. But what I didn't get to tell you was what actually happened when I sat down to write my story. The prompt essentially was, talk about a time in which you leaned in and essentially took a risk. And I started thinking about those risks and what risks had looked like across my career. Now, at the time when I was writing my story, I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was sitting on the firm's management committee, leading government regulatory affairs and public policy. It was a significant role and, frankly, a hard-earned one. And it was, by every external measure, something to be proud of. I still am, by the way. But here's the thing about that role, and about a lot of roles like it. It was structurally designed around managing risk, not creating it and not taking it, but managing it and containing it and anticipating it so that nothing unexpected could happen. That was literally the job description. So when I sat down to write about risk-taking in my own career, something unexpected, at least to me, happened. And I found myself in direct conflict. The stories that I was writing and the moments where I had really stretched in my career and challenged myself and leaned into the unknown were not the stories that role was asking of me anymore. What had become a nagging feeling for quite some time suddenly had nowhere left to hide. It was like somebody turned a spotlight on, and I couldn't look away from what it was illuminating. I realized in that moment that I had outgrown the role. I just hadn't let myself fully know it yet. I felt it, but I didn't have sort of that conscious awareness of it until I actually sat down to write. And what I realized sitting with that was that my ambition hadn't disappeared and it hadn't shrunk. It had just been pointed in the wrong direction toward safety and toward managing within the confines of the role that I was in, toward holding steady in a role that actually rewarded exactly that. I was still ambitious, but I realized that my ambition was perhaps pointed in the wrong direction. This happens to a lot of women, particularly at mid-career, particularly those of us who have worked hard to get somewhere significant, and we don't take lightly what it costs to get there and, frankly, what it costs to stay there. We can find ourselves conflating ambition with the structures that first gave it shape, the title of the firm or the role or the brand that you're associated with, the seat that you have at the table. And then when those structures stop fitting, or maybe when we've outgrown them, we don't always recognize it as an ambition problem. We call it restlessness, or we call it burnout. We call it not being grateful enough for what we have, perhaps. But what if it's actually your ambition doing exactly what it's supposed to do? Evolving, expanding, asking you to aim at something bigger or more true than what the current container allows. Here's the question that I want to offer to you today, and it's the one that changed so many things for me. Not, am I ambitious enough, but what am I ambitious for? Those are completely different questions. The first one puts you on a ladder that maybe someone else built and asks you to climb faster. The second one asks you to figure out where you actually want to go. Sheryl said she's ambitious for a generation of girls who get to choose. And as I think about my own ambition today, I'm ambitious for creating content to help every woman to thrive. I am ambitious about this podcast, the book that I'm slugging away on, the women that I get to be in conversation with every single week. And I'm ambitious for helping women figure out who they are and what they're actually capable of, and maybe giving them some inspiration that they might need each week. That ambition feels nothing like the ambition that I carried into a risk management role at a major professional services firm. And it is 100% more mine. Now, let me bring this through a framework that I think can be really helpful for thinking about this. It's something that I developed called AIM, awareness, intention, and mindset, because I think all of this maps directly onto this question of what you're ambitious for. Okay, before we get into the framework, I just want to say a special shout out to one of our podcast sponsors. It's Afura Coffee. I actually drink this coffee to start my day every single day. It's made from specialty hand-picked beans from certified Rainforest Alliance farms in both Central and South America. Only about 5% of coffees on the market even qualify for this specialty grade. The soils that they grow this coffee in are what really enhance the flavor. And I think once you try it, you will be as hooked as I am. When you purchase this coffee and you use my promo code, which is She Said, you get 15% off your order, and I reinvest the proceeds of whatever sales come from this podcast back into the podcast. So it's a total win-win for you. Check out the link in our show notes where you'll find not only the link to Afura Coffee, but also a few other sponsors as well. If you try it, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear. And in the meantime, let's get back to the show. Okay, let me bring this through a framework I developed to help with this. It's called AIM, AIM, and that stands for awareness, intention, and mindset. Now, awareness is where it starts. For me, it was the act of writing that actually forced that awareness. I couldn't articulate the gap until I tried to tell the story of risk taking, and I found myself writing around a giant contradiction. Now, for you, it might be something different. Maybe it's a conversation that lands wrong or a Sunday night feeling that you experience regularly and you just can't shake. Or maybe it's a moment of watching someone else do work that lights her up and feeling a pang that you can't quite name, but you know something is off. That pang is data. Notice it. Be aware of it. Don't immediately dismiss it. Now, the next piece of the framework is intention. And intention means actively choosing what you're aiming at, not just drifting toward the next logical step. Actually asking yourself, what do I want to build? What am I ambitious about? That question is often more uncomfortable than it sounds, especially if you've spent years succeeding inside of structures that have handed you the answers and have helped you define what success means. When those structures no longer hand you the answers and you are asking the questions yourself and you're asking yourself, what does success look like? The uncertainty can feel really disorienting. That's not a sign that you've lost your ambition, though. That's actually where you begin to get clarity, especially when you combine intention with the awareness required to notice what's happening and to notice what you're actually feeling. Because intention ultimately shows up in the choices that you make every day, where you're spending your time, what you're saying yes to, what you're protecting space for. Those daily decisions seem small, but in fact, they are often the clearest sign of what you're actually ambitious about, whether you've named it yet or not. The final piece of the framework is mindset. And mindset is what makes the shift that you're noticing and embracing sustainable. And here I want to bring in the research of Professor Carol Dweck, whose work on mindset I come back to again and again and again because it's foundational. If you have not read her book called Mindset, I urge you to do so. Dweck's research gives us two ways of looking at the world. A fixed mindset, which reads experiences, especially the difficult or uncomfortable ones, as verdicts. This is who I am. This is my limit. This is as far as I can go. Whereas a growth mindset reads those same experiences as information, an opportunity to learn, to stretch, to understand something that you didn't understand before. Now, apply that to this conversation about ambition. If you're in a role that you've outgrown or maybe standing at the edge of a pivot that feels uncertain and more than a little scary, a fixed mindset will tell you that discomfort is a signal to stay right where you are. That wanting something different means that there's something wrong with you, or that you're being ungrateful, or that you're not capable of what comes next. Whereas a growth mindset asks a completely different set of questions. What is this discomfort telling me? What can I learn from where I am right now? What does this moment have to teach me about where I'm actually meant to go? That shift from verdict to curiosity is not a small thing. It is the difference between staying stuck in a definition of ambition or success that no longer fits and giving yourself permission to author a new one. And that's really what this whole episode comes down to, friend. It's not a question of whether you're ambitious. I'd argue that because you're listening to this, you are already asking this question of yourself. The bigger question, and the one worth reflecting on, the one that frankly has the power to genuinely change things, is considering and reflecting on what you're ambitious about. That shift in framing changes everything. It puts you in the driver's seat. You decide what ambition looks like, and you decide what you're building toward, not just accepting someone else's definition of what ambition or success looks like for you. I want to leave you with something else that Sheryl said at the very end of our conversation last week. She talked about a moment when she was young and learning to ski for the first time. She was looking down a mountain and she was crying because she couldn't see how she was ever going to get to the bottom. And her mother said, just do 10 turns. Don't think about the whole mountain, just do 10 turns. And I think about that in the context of this conversation. If you're in a role that you've outgrown, or maybe you're standing at the edge of a pivot that you can feel, but you can't quite name yet, you don't have to see the whole mountain. You just have to be honest enough to ask the question, to be aware of how you feel, and think about, what does ambition really mean to you? What are you ambitious for? I hope you'll take a minute to sit with that question this week. Maybe let it be a little uncomfortable. Because the women I know who are doing some of their most meaningful work today, the work that actually fits who they are almost always the ones who are willing to let that question crack something open inside them. I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic, the topic of ambition, and how you define it for yourself today. You can find me on social media at Laura Cox Kaplan, and I would love to continue this conversation. And on that note, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off to recharge, something that I'm trying to do each quarter. I hope you get a chance to do that too. But if you've missed any of the terrific episodes that I have been rolling out this year for 2026, now is the perfect time to catch up. We kicked off this year with episode 350 and our goal-setting series, followed by an incredible conversation with Professor Eilert Fishbach on motivation and what it actually takes to stick with your goals. Then we dove into our fabulous collaboration series with the Southern Sea, featuring Birdie's co-founder Bianca Gates, entertainment expert Rebecca Gardner, Emily Dunn from McKinsey & Childs, Abby Glass, the fabulous dress designer based in Atlanta, Caroline Turnipseed, a digital marketing strategist, Mariah Chase, who is the co-founder and CEO of Echium AI. And then my wonderful friend Emily Lampkin joined me to talk about her new book, Duct Tape and White Lies. And if you haven't heard her line about swimsuit friends versus you're so pretty friends, that one is a personal favorite of mine. So be sure and pick up her book and listen to our conversation. And of course, last week's episode with the fabulous Sheryl Sandberg, who I love dearly, in episode 360. So much good content to explore, friend. I'm going to have lots more amazing content coming your way when we pick back up. But for now, if you're enjoying She Said podcast, please consider leaving a review. Your reviews help others who are looking for content like this to find it. And it, honest to goodness, makes my day. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Laura Cox Kaplan. This is She Said podcast, a weekly production of She Said Media. Take care, and I'll talk to you again real soon.